Hello and welcome to today's Mediaworks Masterclass that's going to focus on SEO and it's titled Rank and Rise, How to Elevate Your SEO Strategy. My name is David Norris. I'm the Group Operations Director. I'll be hosting today's Mediaworks Masterclass and I've got two of the SEO team alongside me. Initially, we've got Jack.
So yeah, I'm Jack. I'm the Organic Search Director here at Mediaworks. I've been in the agency side for the last 10 years, purely SEO. And head up everything from content, tech, and DPR here at Mediaworks.
Thanks, Jack. And we've also got Amy.
Hi everyone, I'm Amy and I'm the head of the SEO strategy team here at Mediaworks, and I've been in the SEO industry for around 6 years now.
So how we're going to run today is we've got a number of questions that we'd like to ask, and I know we've been giving these a lot of thought in advance. So I guess I'm going to just dive straight in. So I guess, what are the most significant SEO challenges you've faced in the past year? I know we've seen a lot of things change in the last 12 months. We've seen a lot of things change for clients. We've seen a lot of things change just generally across the industry. So Jack, I'm going to come to you first with this one. Sort of what do you think are the most significant SEO challenges we've seen in the last 12 months?
Yeah, so I think the main ones, which everyone will be aware of, is this introduction and the adoption of AI, whether that's kind of generative or in terms of what we're seeing in search over in America and SG from Google. I think that's just really the main theme we're seeing, and has been the theme for the last year or year and a half or so. In terms of where we're seeing it as like maybe a challenge, I think obviously, the big thing is how or what search is going to look like over the coming years, and how it's going to interrupt potentially click-through rates, and how visitors are going to be interacting now more in Google or in search rather than on site. But for us, obviously as an agency, we're aware of efficiencies and clients wanting to kind of adopt AI into their strategies, and how really we see that working from a longevity point of view, and not just being a quick, write this article for us, let's see what happens, or, going from creating 15 articles a month that are highly targeted, highly specific, to producing, 150, which are more generic and that kind of thing. So it's more about where we're seeing the future going, and actually managing expectations on our side, and actually adopting a strategy that's going to drive long-term results that we're not going to see, penalties for, or a sudden spikes going up, down, depending on kind of us trying to adopt things.
Yeah, I think for me on that, we're seeing a lot of sophistication, I would say, as well from the platform. So in terms of the likes of Google, in terms of being able to detect AI, and I think it is something that we need to be mindful of, in the sense that it's a great hook, isn't it? In the sense that, it'd be brilliant if you could put prompts into a system and it would produce loads of this content, and the content would therefore allow you to rank more effectively. And we've all, talked in the past about the fact that it's about quality of content, but also it is a quantity game in some areas. But I think that we have seen particular challenges around that, haven't we? Around how people use AI and the role at which it plays within sort of that whole process.
Yeah, so I think in terms of general core updates as well, that we're keeping in touch with, alongside the kind of new emergence of the AI and the SGE side of it. Obviously content is remaining at the forefront of that. We've just had the March update, again just reinforcing that content still needs to be quality for a user, and provide them with the best experience and information and knowledge that Google is obviously prized on. But in terms of adding on that layer of the SGE as well, I think we just can be aware of it and do the best we can to strategize when we do see the emergence of it. Every SERP is going to be different, every industry is different. Depending on the content, Google is going to want to show in the SERPs for that query. So yeah, I think we just need to be on our toes and ensure that we're flexible as well when it comes to a strategy.
Yeah, so I guess again, I think what people want to probably know a bit more about is then how do we actually approach that as an organisation then? Because obviously we're dealing with this across multiple clients, multiple sectors, different scales of organisations as well. So I'll come to you, Jack, around how do we actually approach sort of the challenge posed by AI, if you like?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I think what we kind of adopted is very much a kind of bespoke model. As Amy just said, it depends on the website that we're trying to rank, the client, the industry, the keyword even, and it's really how that is playing out in that kind of, for lack of a better term, like battlefield. If the battlefield is very much, we need to produce X amount of content, or we need it to be, again, let's not talk about word counts, but as deep as something, or may to include certain topics. Of course, we are looking at AI to kind of overlay what we already have. So it's taking that human element from here and then using the AI to get to here. But in reality, I think what we're seeing, and as Amy just mentioned in the March update, is that Google is very much clamping down on all of these kind of like profiteering, maybe the wrong word, but trying to take advantage of these strategies by using AI. So for us, it really is looking at the client, looking at the website, looking at the industry, and then seeing where we can fill potential some gaps with AI, whether it be for new ideas, overlaying content in terms of like writing styles, or just seeing if we can get a little bit more efficient with what we're doing. But other than that, we are taking the more evergreen approach, let's say, where we aren't diverting too far away, but we are acknowledging AI as a thing and it's there, and bringing it in where we can. But at no point are we saying, right, we're flipping from being human first to going to purely AI-driven content or purely AI-driven recommendations.
Yeah, because I think for me, AI used in the right context, to me, I think AI is a contextual tool. It's about how you use it. I think there's massive benefits. I think like some of the instances we've seen in terms of helping with research, if we're producing articles, content, etc., thinking about different tones of voices, even things like, grammar checking in a more sophisticated way, etc., all have a massive advantage to play. But I think the nervousness becomes, as you say, is where you move from a sort of a person-led, a human-led approach to an AI-led approach. I think it needs to be absolutely the other way around. It needs to be human-led, AI-assisted, is probably the way to term that.
And I do think it's like another layer of, is SEO dead again, isn't it? Where it's definitely not. And I do think there is that balance to be struck that you've already touched upon there, is like, in essence, we're always going to need a human to add that little bit of spark at the end and make sure that a strategy is going to work for a client, or make sure that it's explained in a way that a client can understand it and see the value behind it as well. Rather than maybe just following what the AI is going to suggest.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's about using AI as an assistive tool rather than as a generation tool. Yeah. I think that's where we're feeling most comfortable at the moment. I feel that's where it will, that has prolonged benefits rather than becoming, as you said, just solely reliant on it. Yeah.
So we've sort of touched on this a bit, so I'm going to move to the second question. We've talked a bit about search engine algorithm update. So I guess, are we seeing any major SEO algorithm update that we've seen over the last, say, 6 months impact the way we do things?
Not massively. I think, to be honest, it's always very similar releases. And I think, like we've mentioned before, like content's always at the forefront, especially with AI creeping in more. We obviously had the partnership between Reddit, which saw user-generated content, and Reddit specifically obviously dominating the SERPs over kind of traditional content or website URLs. So I do think that obviously there'll be loads in the background that Google are doing that we don't really get visibility on. But I think the standalone point of the updates always are just do your kind of strategy in the best way, meet a user's needs, and usually you won't see a lot of negative movement from them.
I would say we've been quite lucky over the last March update. None of our clients have seen any drastic dips, anything like that. Obviously, clients were onboarding. Again, I don't know how much we can say, but in terms of their strategies and adopting AI in terms of content and that kind of thing, we have seen some dips there. But any client we've worked on, our strategies haven't, touch wood, haven't seen anything. So.
Yeah, I think for me, because what we're seeing really is the algorithm updates that we've seen are not that significant. The more, I guess, incremental and they are revolutionary update. And I think like that for me is probably a testament to where Google is going with the updates as well, in the sense that how they see search playing out. Don't get me wrong, inevitably in 12 months down the line, there might be a big update that comes along. But I think we are seeing sort of, I guess, resolution, like structure around key themes that have been the key themes for the last 4 or 5 years are just being weighted slightly differently. And of course, we never really get to see the algorithm anyway, so we're all just making our sort of best estimates based on the information and the latest information we can get. But I think it seems to be at the moment, it's like stick with the strategies, best practices that we've been utilizing for a while, and then you'll see the benefit. I think trying to fluctuate and manipulate towards an algorithm is actually probably where you get into some significant trouble, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I think it's one of those where a key piece for us is in our strategies, we leave enough room to be dynamic with it and actually say, okay, right, we're not going to have a view on AI immediately, but actually what we can do is look at the data, see where people are winning, see where people are losing, and then shift our focus to that, rather than just coming out with a blanket statement of this is how we're going to approach it, and then that either falling to be right or to be wrong. We can afford ourselves a bit of time to actually see where it works and where it doesn't.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point. And that leads me into another question then, because I guess like we're always asked, and obviously some of the industries we work in are massively competitive. I don't know many industries that aren't competitive like right now, to be honest, from a Google perspective, from a search engine perspective. So I guess what strategies have proven most effective for us? And I guess, look, the answer's going to be, it depends, right? And the answer's probably going to be, it's contextual. But have we got any sort of examples of where we've seen sort of the biggest improvements or the best performance across the piece?
Yeah, I think we've had a lot in place at the minute as well, just to kind of consolidate content. So kind of what we touched on before, if it was a case where we've noticed a few gaps with a client's content and kind of gone down the path of creating that, sometimes, especially following an update, we can step back and reevaluate that content and think, should we maybe consolidate that? Should we make it a longer form piece? Try and make it more evergreen, so that kind of an update that is coming out next maybe doesn't affect it, or we see a better increase from it. And to be honest, kind of standard stuff as well, like improving the internal linking of a client. We've done that recently for quite a large client that we have, and we have seen a lot of really positive movement from just cleaning up that internal strategy and hierarchy of the content as well.
Yeah, I'd say as well, so when we are talking about big websites that are playing against, big competitors like Amazon's, eBay's of the world, Auto Traders of the world, we found it really beneficial to be very targeted. So it is kind of leaning on, that content EAT side of things, and actually saying, right, we're going to do these 5 things extremely well, and we're going to have full coverage, we're going to have, citations from all these different publications, these backlinks, these digital PR campaigns going live, and that has really helped us really drive that kind of revenue to clients based on that area. So it's actually saying, right, we know these products are the most profitable for you, we can see the searches available from these keywords or these kind of clusters, and then really drilling down on that has really helped us to kind of drive that performance that clients want to see, without going with a kind of like a top level blanket approach where you're kind of touching a little bit of everything. I think that's been really important for us.
And I think the way that people search is always changing, isn't it? I mean, Google roll out a statistic every year, which is like 15% of all searches are new queries to the platform, etc., which, again, I take probably with a bit of pinch of salt, really. But again, sort of, how do we sort of spot those developing keywords that we potentially could go after from a lucrative perspective? Because again, what people call things might change over a period of time, or something new comes out and the market moves. How do we engage with that as a process?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the agencies, as an agency, we do quite well. I think the typical answer would be we look at a number of tools, but I feel like, if you're just looking at tools, you're always playing catch up. I think within our kind of service lines and with our different departments, so we have our strategic planners, which do a lot of the audience research, a lot of kind of what are actually our audience looking for in terms of the mediums of content they want to kind of digest, but also the actual subject matters. And based off of that, with our immersion sessions where we actually really get into the kind of the meat of a client's industry, we can start pulling our own insight, their industry knowledge together to then actually pull it into an SEO strategy. Whereas I think if we were only going to say, we look at SEMrush or Ahrefs, well, by that point, the keyword or the terms which are popular are already popular. It's not an emerging trend at that point.
Yeah. And that is, I think, really difficult, isn't it? Because as you say, that first mover advantage in the marketplace can have a significant impact, because at that point, you've obviously probably got breadth of content, depth of content, you've probably got typology of content covered. So I think it's really interesting to try and spot those trends before they happen. And like you say, I think aligning that with sort of customer changes and values and behavioural changes is so important in everything that we do from an SEO perspective. I think that leads me on to the point about that I want to make just around voice search. So voice search is one of those areas that I hear a lot of people, I go to, a social event and somebody will be asking me, what do we do around like voice search, and is it a big thing, and how does that fit with people having things like Alexas in the home, etc. So I guess, how do we cater towards sort of those emerging technologies such as sort of voice? And I know we've touched on AI previously, but voice in particular, how do we engage with that?
Yeah, I think, again, it's kind of audience-led slightly in the way that ourselves, like, how would we, when we're at home, what type of questions are we asking our devices? Is it a long-form question? Is it just snappy little snippets? In my case, it's usually, while I'm cooking, can I feed my dog this item that I'm cooking with? So I think it's definitely leaning on that audience side, and just as a person as well. Yes, we optimise for Google, but what's a person actually going to be asking and searching for? So to be honest, we treat it very similar to a search engine, and I think it is those long form questions, ensuring that we're answering key questions that a user might be asking around our client or industry, but obviously wanting a kind of more condensed response to it.
I think it's about writing style as well, isn't it? So in terms of writing more conversationally, so having succinct and concise answers, but not writing it like a robot or kind of keyword stuffing, or it just all goes back to that whole thing about writing for the user, doesn't it? And just being natural with it.
Yeah, I think we use voice search in our house to settle debate. So, if we're ever having a debate around, is that actually right? And is that correct? And who did do that? It's like those really punchy bits of fact. And I think, but it is interesting, isn't it? Because I do think the way that we interact across different medium choices is obviously evolving all the time. So in relation to content, we've talked a lot about sort of content and content choices, content modes. I think sort of EEAT is becoming increasingly important. Stands for experience, expertise, authority, and trust. Yeah. So it's becoming increasingly important. So what steps have we taken to enhance the expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness of our content? How do we engage with that?
Yeah, I think, again, it's one of those practices that as a SEO agency and an SEO professional, you should always be striving to meet those type of guidelines anyway. I think ensuring that we have got a key person within a business to kind of assign their name to a comment or to a piece of work or a bit of content has proved quite lucrative for us, rather than it maybe being someone less senior in a business or just a generalised bit of content. I think having that added layer of that expert on top of it is proven to obviously show that authority side.
The other side of it as well is, again, we talked about like the kind of like a hub approach, and it is just about, once we have that expertise, actually what else can we talk about within the same realms? So it's actually saying, right, okay, so we have this person, or we have this website that's an authority in this subject matter. Okay, so how far can we take that? And then should we then start looking at another area and then bring somebody else in, or bring in, another element into the strategy to kind of keep pushing that?
Yeah, I think it's funny how much I hear about EAT, and in reality, it's been in SEO probably just under different like typology, different naming convention for as long as I can think, really. It was always about, how do you get your expertise? How do you show authority? How do you offer sort of trustworthy information and guidance? Because we've had this major debate about misinformation, especially in the world that we live in these days. It's like, so how do we deal with that? And I think EEAT is something that most people should be thinking about, regardless of whether you're working with an agency or not. It should always be front of mind in terms of how you go about producing your content, and how do you show that? And I guess that would be a question is how do you go about sort of showing sort of the system, if you like, Google itself, sort of that you've got that expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness as well?
think it's one of those things again, just ensuring that whatever content you're creating is relevant and true and kind of from the heart of your business or your client, and you know that it's what your audience is looking for. And I think the forefront of SEO has always been, yes, we optimise for a bot or for Google's benefit, but it does need to satisfy a person at the end of the day. And I think that's been part of Google's mission, to provide the best experience, the best answers to your question as a person searching as well. So yeah, I think it's just something that you should naturally be trying to improve and keep in mind when you are creating your site's content.
I think you can also obviously implement like a couple of more like techniques or strategic, tactical kind of elements, and those would be schema, so author schema, and actually tying your authors or your content writers back into entities and ensuring that they are kind of known people with like LinkedIn profiles, that kind of thing. Yeah. And then on the flip side of that, you've got kind of outreach or link building to actually get in citations or links, sorry, about certain topics or from other publications which are trustworthy about to you, sets you up as an authority because you have, you know, who's written it and then all these other people talking about it that points into you. Yeah,
I think people often forget, don't they, about what the whole purpose of Google is really. And if Google was giving us terrible content as a user, we'd go somewhere else for that content. And I think that is one of the things that we are seeing quite often now, where people are sort of potentially going to social media or going to other various platforms across the world. It's like Google's aim from an organic search perspective is making sure that you as the user get the best information the quickest. And I think that they obviously use an algorithm as a way of judging that. So I think that, as you say, following those principles that we've discussed is super important for everything that we do. I guess just on that, in terms of with the rise of things like visual and video content, how should SEO professionals approach that? Because I think that we've gone from sort of written content being absolutely front and center and being seen very much as the primary content type. We're now seeing things like video. You know, I'm engaging more as a user with more video content, particularly around things like instructional content and visual learning, etc. We've obviously got sort of image-based searches taking place. So how do we engage with that from an agency perspective? Like, what's our view on the balance?
Yeah, I think again it can kind of depend based on queries and what that audience is obviously expecting to see in the search results. We saw quite recently, obviously, TikTok followers and metrics are actually starting to be pulled into SERPs, as well as videos alongside YouTube, which has obviously been there for a very long time now. But yeah, I think in terms of what Google's probably trying to do as well, they're maintaining people going to them as well as directly to those channels. So pulling in Reddit, like we've previously said, pulling in TikTok, kind of pulling together all those separate sources and ensuring that ultimately a person can find all of that still through Google as well.
Yeah, I think a main challenge which the industry probably won't want to talk about is the fact that we don't have data from TikTok to suggest, you know, what people are looking for. Obviously, we have like trends and hot topics, and we can look at, you know, videos which have already been, but we have no view. And they do have that trend tool as well, but we have no view like we do with keyword data to say how many people are looking to how to boil a bag of rice or something like that. So that is a massive challenge for us, and understanding actually where the value comes from. Because as we know with TikTok especially, it's so flippant in terms of there's a trend one week, the trend doesn't exist next week. So actually, something which we all need to kind of be aware of is actually how evergreen are these social platforms. And video, you know, as an agency is not cheap, it's very labor intensive to produce. So if it's a one-hit wonder, actually versus creating more content pieces or optimizations on site, what's more beneficial in the long run, or where are you in your SEO kind of strategy or your maturity?
I think you've got to be built up to be so reactive as well, haven't you? Like you've just said, it isn't as easy to kind of strategize or kind of roadmap, I suppose, your strategy from a TikTok point of view or things like that. But obviously we can perform kind of TikTok SEO within using TikTok as a search engine within the platform. So it does stem back to kind of the baseline of SEO, which is your keywords, getting your keywords in your videos, on your screen, in your bios, things like that. So it can definitely still be utilised within platform. But yeah, like Jack said, I think it's increasingly more difficult to be that reactive, because they do just pop up out of nowhere.
Yeah. I think we were on another talk the other day, and another way people are using TikTok videos is actually by embedding them into blog posts. And that's not to say, because that's going to increase your SEO, but actually what other strategies are leaning on, which is interesting, which I won't discredit straight away, but is that actually it's going to increase your softer metrics, your user metrics. Because you put a video in a blog post, it means people are going to sit there for 30 seconds watching it versus going off to TikTok to go find it. So again, that's an interesting strategy in terms of actually, well, how could a TikTok asset actually improve the user journey or kind of the stickiness of your website to then benefit you on the other side of that, potentially in SERPs, depending on how much you believe, user data feeds into that.
I think for me, it's a really interesting one around brand as well. When I think about sort of video production and video content, because I think that one of the things that you get into is it's really actually quite easy to produce video at a certain level of output. We've seen it with user generated content. It's one of the reasons that things like social media and social networks have taken off, and particularly with a focus on video, I think it's really easy to produce. I think the clients that we work with, though, where it's very much about brand, it's very much about tone of voice, it's very much about sort of brand protection, it's about sort of consistency and standards, etc. That's when it becomes way more difficult. So I think it's one of the things that larger organizations will have to balance sort of across what they do. I'm thinking about car dealerships as an example, where they're giving things like video reviews. That's become quite a common practice in a lot smaller garages, but in bigger garages where you've then got production costs, production values, it's like, how do you incorporate that, and what's the balance between sort of, as you say, written content versus that video asset, and how do you integrate the pair of them? I think starts to be quite an interesting conversation.
I think like what sprung to mind when you were saying around like the larger companies as well is the ones that are actually getting it really right are those ones that are kind of developing a personality. So think of like Ryanair, where everyone loves their TikTok content. They're putting a smile on the face on the side of their plane and like taking kind of the mick out of themselves. But like you've said, that can only apply to certain businesses. And I think when you're at a certain size as well, you kind of can take a bit more risk with your content. But yeah, if it's a certain industry or there's more hoops to jump through from like an approval point of view as well to get your content live, that is where the challenge can come with jumping on the trends on TikTok and actually getting the returns and the visibility from it as well.
Yeah, I think you'd start to get into problems when you're in regulated industries. I'm thinking finance, utilities, etc., where we know there's a massive amount of regulation that's required around user-generated content. What does that mean in terms of, is that advice, is it guidance, is it offering assistance, etc.? It all needs working through, which means there's a significant requirement and resource requirement on the approval process as well.
Definitely. There is a lot on those type of industries on TikTok. So you've got like account talk showing people how to invest. So like it is massively popular. But yeah, like you said, I think that's where on-site content and in detail content that's actually verified is always going to be the then logical next step. If you are watching a video on TikTok, kind of prove it and ensure that the content that's being generated by a specific user is actually right. So website and long form content is always going to be part of that journey as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask the question that like people never like to be asked around future gazing, because it's one of those things that you make a comment on video saying what your view is, and then inevitably 24 months technology changes and it moves on. But I guess the question would be is, where do we see sort of SEO heading in the next 5 years? Like, what are the major trends sort of that we are anticipating?
Yeah, I think from our side, it's just there's going to be more of this. I think there's going to be less available clicks in SERPs. I think we're clearly seeing that over the last, not just now with AI, but over the last 5 years with feature snippets, more things coming in just in terms of actual functions within SERPs, whether that be, flight bookings, now with, I can't remember what it's called, the vehicle listing ads, that's like shopping. Yeah. So yeah, Google really is pulling away from driving more clicks to search. And I know there's a lot of people in the industry that have done a lot of studies on it as well. So I feel like it's adapting to actually how we get into those conversations, get into those searches. now, really. So it is about kind of amending that content or looking at actually what's working or what we think will work for AI, and actually really having a view on that over the next 5 years to actually what might change.
Yeah, and I think that's where like testing is going to be really important for us as well as an agency in terms of seeing what Google rolls out in certain types of SERPs for certain types of users and what they want to see. Obviously, we've had localization and map packs and things like that around for a very long time, which always tends to see people clicking those over an organic result. So yeah, like Jack said, I think we are just going to see increasingly more competitive SERPs and less real estate for us to be kind of fighting over. But I think that just ties us back into what we've been saying around the quality. We just need to ensure that what we're creating for our clients is going to be what is featured in that smaller space and can compete with those updates and the more user first SERPs that Google are kind of leaning towards.
I think as well, we have to talk a little about tech, in the sense that it's also going to be about sort of how websites are performing and actually is the website giving the user a good experience and how significant of a ranking factor that is. I know we were talking the other day about if you were to technical content and then you split that down into on-site, off-site, sort of how would you rank them? And I think for us, it's like ultimately we had the conversation around if you haven't got a functionally sound website that's ticking all of the boxes, actually you can have the best content that you want and you can have all of the fantastic links that you want, which obviously show your authority, etc. But you've got significant issues because you're making it more difficult for Google.
Yeah, especially like we've all touched upon with the SERPs becoming more visual as well. So obviously ensuring that Google can actually crawl, render and actually show and index that visual content, which might end up being missed and not favoured in those visual SERPs if it's not set up correctly. So yeah, I think tech's obviously the foundations of any SEO campaign, but even more so from that side of making sure Google can access anything and everything based on what that SERP is going to look like, which none of us kind of fully know at the moment. Yeah.
I think just a follow-up question on that really, and the debate between mobile and desktop. So again, we see a lot of conversations taking place around, are we mobile first, are we desktop first? And a lot of people build websites and then think about the desktop and then think about sort of mobile as a secondary sort of way of consuming the content. Sort of, where's that debate at right now?
I think it can depend on industry as well, can't it? Obviously, from Google's perspective, mobile is first and will always be first, just based on, I think, user behaviour and how we consume now. But there will ultimately always be those industries where it is someone sat at a desk, they're a site manager, they might be working in a certain industry where they probably are looking during the day or things like that. But quite interesting, we had a conversation a few weeks ago, didn't we, around kind of the times that people search. So is it, not that we do it here at Mediaworks, but is it that someone's sat at work thinking, well, yeah, I need to sort that out now, or I'm going to have a quick look for a holiday during the day. So I think that as well can play a part on the device, can't it, as well, if we're at home or what time of day we're looking as well.
Yeah. But yeah, I think as Amy said, I think we are in a mobile first world. I think more people own mobiles than definitely they own computers or desktops. Yeah. So that's what we optimise towards. And yeah, there's no real differentiation between them both in terms of doing one for the other, one for the other. It should be a holistic strategy that's put together.
Cool. I guess sort of what role do we see things like automation and AI tools in particular play in the future of SEO strategies? No, it's a tricky one to talk about in the sense that AI is very sort of moving feast right now. We're seeing massive amounts of development, and I think the key for me is this is the worst. The point right now is probably the worst AI is ever going to be. It's going to continue to evolve and get more sophisticated and better. Sort of, how can we potentially use sort of the AI tools that exist that are out there to sort of, support and develop our strategies from an SEO perspective?
Yeah, I think we need to use it as kind of the bones, don't we? Like you've touched on before. I think if there is a strategy that we've already created or got in our minds, is there just a tiny missing part that we need, and the AI that might have all the sources quite quickly, it can make us slightly more efficient if it is large topics we're trying to cover, for example. So I think yeah, we've always got to use it as maybe a very basic starting point and build upon it. But there then are some uses where like it can be really beneficial to actually utilise it from a higher level as well.
Yeah, I would say one of the more exciting things about AI, which is a bit of a double-edged sword, but it lowers the barrier to entry for a lot of like more technical topics. And a lot when we talk about, there are people that are out there coding video games using ChatGPT and not touching a line of code themselves. So when we talk about like website optimization, that actually it may bring up topics which you might have missed or that aren't in your optimization plan, and then even actually how you'd practically go and implement that in your website as well. So, it can talk to you about like DNS settings and verification and that kind of thing, which as an average or as a more junior SEO member, you may not know about. So actually it gives you that kind of those next steps on what to look at. And actually if it's used as a bit of like a ladder approach and like I said, lowering that barrier to entry, then that's quite interesting.
I think where you get to though is it's about knowing the right questions to ask. I was speaking to somebody the other day and we were saying that there's job roles out there which is like AI prompters, and you're starting to see, and I have always said when I sort of work with colleagues who are using AI in different forums and whether we're using it from a paid perspective, it's like there's people who are using it really well and there's people who are not using it very well. It's almost like the old Googling. There's people who are really good in searching in Google and getting the right information. There's other people who add a layer, put in particular terms or phrases, etc., that drive better results. I think like that's one of the things that we are definitely going to see. I think it's why, yes, the barriers to entry are lower, but they're probably lower at a lower level, in the sense that if you actually then want to be more sophisticated, you are going to require that level of knowledge to know what questions to ask and what the prompts to ask to get the results that you want.
And test it as well, like we've said with a lot of the SEO kind of aspects, we need to test it. So it could be a case we ask it something the first time, and again, as a person, we know that that's not quite right, but you're always going to need that human layer to verify it. And I think reword how you're asking it or add that extra layer on, add a bit more context for it, because obviously it learns by what we ask it and what result it's given us each time.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point actually, because if if we all typed in ChatGPT or whatever it might be, what colour's the sky, they're all going to say blue. Yeah. So actually, when we're talking about SEO, if we're all typing the same things, we're all asking the same things, we're optimizing for the same things, we're all going to get the same answer, which means there's no competition, everyone's just at that same level. So I think actually, based on what we've just said, that's right. We should be thinking about actually how we take that to the next level in terms of advancement.
I think for me, it's where you get to the point where you start to talk about why that human element's so important. Because as you say, if everybody's using the same techniques and tools and software, it almost create a playing field, if you like. But actually, what's the point of difference? How are you going to elevate that? Well, it's actually going to be about the human actually powering it and prompting it and asking the right questions and making those decisions and understanding how to add that bit of nuance to it. And I think that's the important piece, is that people aren't just going to want generic responses. They want, when they put in a particular request or query into the search engine, I think what they're wanting is something that absolutely ticks the boxes in terms of contextualized based search. And I think people are asking, and you can see it in terms of long tail searches and the way that they're increasing. People aren't putting in holidays, they're putting family holidays with summer sun, with whatever experience you might want to get as part of that. And I think sort of that's where I think like the human element can really sort of differentiate between the AI driven results that you might see or people might be trying to focus on versus sort of those human sort of
exactly
outputs.
And I think it's intent behind those searches, isn't it? Like Jack said, people might be searching what colour is the sky, but ultimately you probably want more information than just the answer. You do want reading around it, some examples. You want to draw on the SEO person's kind of experience as well. Like I said, if we've worked somewhere before or in a certain industry that you've tested and you know it works, or there's different ways you can approach a strategy, I think that is something that I'm not saying AI will never be able to learn it or do it, but I do think definitely in this period where we definitely need to be adding that layer onto the AI.
So I guess if you're a business and you're struggling to keep up with the various changes that are taken in place in SEO right now, sort of what would be the best advice that you would give to people in terms of sort of how to approach their SEO?
I would still say approach it from the very fundamentals, things that have existed, for the last 10 years or so, 5-10 years. Go with the tried and tested method of, sorting out tech on-site, off-site, and then let the noise kind of sort itself out and then see what's still standing when the dust settles. I think people that are time poor, resource poor, that is the only real advice you can give. There's no point in trying to hop on a trend just because you can or just because it's new and shiny. As we've said, without the fundamentals, these things have nothing to layer on top of anyway. So yeah, it's being basic.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's almost like focus on what you've always focused on, but do it better. Because the competition's getting better, and we know the competition's getting better, and the volume of content being produced is getting increasingly sort of, greater volume and greater quality, greater depth, etc. So I think for me, it's like you've probably got, as you say, the fundamental aspects of whether it be tech, whether it be on-site, whether it be off-site, but it's also about then how do you level up? Like what does taking that next step? And I think we've talked about sort of an evolution matrix, and we've talked about adoption matrix, and it'll also be like where you're at right now. Not everybody's starting from the same point either. So what's exceptional for one organization might actually be something that's just the norm for others. So I think this, for me, it's like look at the best in class in your industry as well, but also be cognizant of the fact that they've only got a certain amount of resource, and therefore what you should focus on and how you go about deciding on what you focus on. And I know we've talked about this, haven't we, in terms of if you were to, I know I touched on it earlier, but if you were to sort of start with it all, where do you start? What is the starting point? And do you want to shed any light on that, Jack, in terms of the conversation that we were having around what are the areas to focus on and the view of order, if you like?
Yeah, so we always say is technical. So technical at the very start, and like we said, ensuring that everything's crawlable, indexable, Googlebot can, and all the other bots out there can see the content you're putting out there. Then moving through to kind of relevance, so that would be your on-site content, whether that be on transactional or informational pages, as well as press releases and that kind of thing. Then moving to more informational points of view, so once your money pages, for example, are all sorted out, moving to informational, overlaying that further relevancy, and then really gearing up for kind of the digital PR and then outreach of that. And then finally through advancement, and actually then at that point, how can we utilize these cutting edge kind of tactics to give us that competitive advantage in these bigger industries.
Yeah. So it's almost like a scoring matrix, isn't it, that you would go through and be like, right, okay, we've now covered all of this, or I guess we've covered each area to the best of our ability that we've currently got in terms of the capabilities that we've got as an organisation before moving on to the next stage. Because I think that is the thing, isn't it? It's a bit like, we've talked about it from a paid perspective, is people often focus on sort of forget bidding strategies. It's like, what does the creative look like? And the creative is really, really important. But fundamentally, if you've not got tracking set up, if you're not targeting the right people, if you've not got the right bidding strategies, actually your efficiencies are going to be through the floor. And I think SEO is very similar in the sense that if you haven't got your fundamentals in place, then it doesn't matter what you do in terms of all of the nice visual stuff on the other side. It's because actually the system's never going to see it, the platform's never going to see that content.
I think it's quite easy to get wrapped up in the kind of industry conversation when you see all these, we do it, but the agency's going, yeah, we've just got this, homeware brand, these links, we've got this retailer, these links, or we've done this DPR campaign. But again, this is very much looking at businesses that are, at a 9 out of 10 versus, a business we might work with, or you've just launched, that's at a 3 out of 10. Yeah. It's sort of understanding where you are in that journey or in that strategic position, and then really aligning your SEO strategy with that, rather than just looking at the big shiny thing that's happening and everyone's screaming about.
And I think it's important to say as well, like you've touched on there, yes, we might be at that shiny stage, but always keeping in the back of your mind the kind of more boring or dull kind of side of it as well, ensuring that your tech is right. Because especially if we're focusing on creating a lot of content or pushing out a lot of content, making sure that the pages we're actually linking back to is sound and there's never going to be any errors, so we're losing authority or trust as well from a user if we're pointing them to pages that aren't necessarily going to provide the best UX, but we might have gained a really great amount of links from a campaign too. So yeah, I think although we're saying obviously there's that journey to follow, it's always important that we are kind of jumping back every now and then and just ensuring that the previous parts are still where they should be as well.
I think, yeah, even from earlier in the conversation, you talked about a big automotive client we have. Yeah, they get hundreds of thousands of visits a month. But actually, we're going back from to the content generation that we've gone through to actually consolidate it, actually update internal linking, ensure that all the links that we are distributing throughout the site are having a meaningful impact. Yeah. And we are seeing growth from that. So it is one of those things where, yes, we have this scale, but we are constantly going backwards and forwards to ensure that everything's optimized and not just pushing on irrespective of whatever's happening on site.
Yeah, it's not a static space, is it? Like, the market dynamics are always there. Things continue to evolve, and just because you wrote a great article that drove like lots of traffic, 3 years ago, doesn't mean it's actually cutting edge anymore. It might need updating because things just move on, and I think that is often a significantly overlooked aspect, in the sense that what are you doing to maintain your real estate and how are you actually keeping that up to date, I think is like really important for anybody who's thinking about SEO. Is how do you, it's not a one-hit wonder, it's how do you keep evolving that? What does it look like? Can you consolidate that? Does it now suit a different content format? Do we consolidate a couple of pages together? Should it be split out into numerous pages? Because actually now it's become a sort of subdomain or sub area in its own right. I think is really important. Okay, so what common SEO myths or misconceptions should businesses be aware of? So this is stuff that I guess would come with like a hazardous warning, because I hear this all of the time in terms of, we'll be no doubt socializing with people and they'll say, oh, I heard this about SEO, or did you know that this is coming into play soon? And you're like, I'm not quite sure about that one. So anything from your perspective that jump out in terms of any misconceptions, any myths that you'd want to debunk?
I think my one was going to be what we talked about though, which is that SEO seen as this one-hit wonder. Once you've done it, it's a tick in the box, move on to the next thing. We have clients at all kind of stages and sizes that kind of say, okay, we did SEO last year, so let's move on to something else. Yeah. And it's just understanding that, yeah, like you said, it's a moving game that never stays still. And last year you may have passed Core Web Vitals, this year you don't. So it is understanding that it isn't always on. It is just something which, much like you wouldn't not hoover your house, you should stop carrying out SEO to your website. And yeah, that would be mine.
Yeah, I think mine might be just creating content for the sake of it, or ranking for keywords for the sake of it. I think there's always a lot of noise in the industry space of a screenshot of a Search Console graph or an Ahrefs graph saying like, we've gained all these keywords, and I think just tying it back to, is the intent right for your client and your industry, and ensuring that, yeah, it's great having a certain amount of rankings or content that you've created, but ultimately what is the goal of that and what value is it driving? And yeah, just ensuring that ultimately it's for a user, not just we're optimizing for Google or we've created that so that Google crawls it and we're shown in the SERPs, because ultimately what value is that driving, and is it actually going to convert and kind of boost your SEO effort?
Yeah, I think mine would be around people's understanding of the SERP itself, in the sense that what can you pay for, what can you not pay for, where does organic fit, how localized is the content, like what's the sort of focus, if you like, in the sense that I think people often think that what everybody sees is the same thing as an output, and actually it's way more advanced than that now. It's actually, again, it goes back to that contextualized piece, and there's a whole range of sort of determining factors that decide and dictate as to what we get shown, i.e. if Jack searches from his house, I search from mine, we're unlikely to see the same things for the same search, and we're also likely to see paid play a role in that as well. And I think for me it's about people understanding that there's all of this different types of real estate in the SERP, and actually there's multiple ways to actually influence these different areas, whether it be images, whether it be video, whether it be localized search, whether it be sort of featured snippets, etc. I think it's a constantly evolving area, and like one of the things I would be sort of saying is it's not static. that Google will keep evolving this all of the time. You've touched on it there in terms of vehicle listing ads or hotel ads that we saw previously. Again, things that weren't so prominent. We've seen images play a bigger role. We're seeing videos. We're seeing Reddit playing a bigger role now than it had done because since the acquisition, etc. So I think for me, one of the misconceptions is that the SERP itself will stay quite static. It's constantly moving, constantly evolving.
And I think that's one of those things, especially working in marketing, that we can take for granted sometimes. I think we'll all have conversations with family members or someone asking, what job do you do again? And I think we do take for granted that not everyone has that knowledge to know that they're seeing something totally different to someone else, or why am I not seeing this exact product that I want to show you when you're at your house? Like, I think, yeah, we can take that for granted sometimes when you've worked in the space for as long as we have as well. So, yeah, definitely, I think it's definitely an education piece. And I suppose just to tie it back up as well, like that's what AI can be really useful for. It might be my granddad asking me what I do you still build websites? And I'm like, no, please ask ChatGPT what SEO is. So I think there's different ways to consume that content and educate yourself if you are a client or just an everyday user of like why you're seeing certain things and why something you searched for yesterday might not be there today when you're trying to find it. I think it's really interesting.
So for those people out there who are working in sort of marketing, digital marketing, SEO space, can we recommend any tools or resources for effective SEO analysis and improvement? Like, what are our go-to tools that we'd recommend? And again, I appreciate there's going to be different tools in different areas used in different ways. But, if you were to go top 3 tools that you'd recommend for people to think about using, what would they be? Jack, I'm going to come to you first.
I think I would start with that a lot of the tools have become a lot closer over the last few years. We're seeing a lot of kind of keyword databases all be kind of slimmed down, where I think, there's always arguments between Ahrefs and SEMrush and that kind of thing. I think not they're all much for muchness now, but they're all as useful as each other. I think that's a better way of putting it.
They're also getting more consistent, aren't they?
Yeah.
I think is what we're seeing in terms of the results that you get out of them. I think we used to see quite a significant amount of variance. So you could get one result from one and one information from another, and you'd be sat there going, well, what are we making our judgment call on? We almost had to select one from which we benchmark. I think where we're now seeing that is there is a convergence between them in the sense that the results for me seem to be getting a lot more closer across the platforms.
I think they are all kind of inheriting aspects from each other as well. Yeah. So if we want a time we might have used SEMrush for a certain thing, actually that's being rolled out across all of them. So I think ultimately it's down to preference, I think, especially as a SEO professional. Like, what do you just find works better for you? And like you touched on, it's benchmarking the same thing, like obviously not using data from one tool to compare it to another. But yeah, I'd say as well, just utilising like Search Console and actual Google-led tools as well can always be a good shout. Obviously, keyword planner, things like that, they're never maybe fully relevant or based on exact numbers that obviously we can never kind of estimate that. But yeah, I think falling back on the kind of OG tools.
The classics, yeah, Screaming Frogs, that kind of thing. But I think I would go a little bit controversial and say actually, you as a person or as a marketer in your industry is probably one of the biggest like tools within it, because your customers, what's happening. Like I said previously, a tool is only measuring what's happened, whereas you might know what is happening, and that's really important. If you can, we've won plenty of times where we see something happening and we create content around it, whether that be video, on page, that kind of thing, and then there'll be a period where it's picking up, and then we see that kind of grow. So that's where I would say really that is also extremely important. Rather than looking outside, potentially to have a little look what you've got in your organisation, what you've got, where you're working, and bringing that into your strategy.
And I think like we were all having a bit of a chat before around like, is it a new TV show that's coming out? Okay, how can we jump on that and tailor a DPR campaign around it before the noise happens and everyone else does it? So I think it is, like just to touch on what Jack said, is the person and what we're consuming in our own lives and what we actually would like to read as well, because that's usually what everyone else is talking about as well.
Right, well, thank you very much. That's been really interesting, useful session, and hopefully everybody watching, listening, etc., is going to take away quite a lot. You know, you've highlighted there, Jack. I think that sort of the point's very, very valid in the sense that it is that person aspect. And I think if you are listening, watching this type of content, it shows that you're trying to sort of progress, develop, think about how you're doing things, considering what are best practices, etc. And I think that's the way to approach this in an ever-evolving space. So thanks very much for your input, guys. It's been much appreciated. Thanks, I say, for everybody who's been sort of watching, listening, etc. And I'd just like to draw everybody's attention to the next session that we'll be doing, which is going to focus on paid social. So a totally different area of digital marketing, but nonetheless just as interesting, I'm sure. But thank you very much.